The sound that broke me wasn't a shout. It wasn't the slam of a door or the shattering of glass. It was quiet. It was the sound of my husband's voice, filtered through the tinny speaker of his phone, traveling down the polished hardwood floor of our Baltimore row house, slipping under the door of my office, and landing in my ear like a shard of ice. He was laughing with his best friend, Jerome. It was a relaxed, easy sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. And then, after the laughter subsided, came the sentence. The sentence that functioned like a final line of code in a program that had been running buggy for years, the one that resolved everything to a single, devastating truth. He said it so casually, with the thoughtless confidence of a man who believes he owns the architecture of his world. That sound, that sentence, was the moment the entire system came to a quiet, catastrophic halt. My name is Camille. I am 34 years old, and for the last 8 of those years, I had been married to Wesley. I'm a software engineer. I build systems, I debug faulty logic, and I understand that the most stable structures are built on clean, elegant, and honest code. In my world, you document everything. You leave comments so the next person who comes along knows why a decision was made. You create systems that are legible, maintainable, and can withstand stress. For years, I believed a marriage was a similar kind of project. A collaborative build, a shared repository of trust and effort. Wesley, who was 37, had a different philosophy. He didn't see our marriage as a system we built together. He saw it as a platform that came pre-installed with a suite of features designed for his convenience, and I was the lead developer, chief of maintenance, and 24/7 tech support, all rolled into one. He had come to mistake my patience for permanence, my love for a service-level agreement with no expiration date. In software development, there's a concept called legacy code. It's a system that's been around for so long, patched and updated by so many different hands, that its original logic is lost to time. It works mostly, but no one wants to touch it. It's fragile, convoluted, and terrifying to change because one small adjustment could bring the whole thing crashing down. You learn to work around its flaws, to accept its inefficiencies, because the cost of rebuilding from scratch seems too high. Our marriage had become legacy code, and I was the only one who still knew how to keep it running. The sentence that finally forced a complete system rewrite came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home, deep in a complex debugging problem for my own job, the one that paid our mortgage. I had my headphones on, but I'd paused my music to think. Wesley was in the living room, on a call with Jerome. He must have assumed the music was still playing, that my focus was a wall he couldn't penetrate. He'd grown accustomed to the bubble of my concentration, treating it as a convenient soundproof barrier. "Man, I'm telling you, she's been on edge all week about this product launch," he said, his voice a low grumble of complaint. I heard Jerome's indistinct murmur in response. "Yeah, I know. I gotta be supportive." Wesley sighed, a performance of martyrdom for an audience of one. "But it's like, can I get a minute where it's not about her deadlines?" My fingers froze over my keyboard. It was such a small, common complaint, the kind of venting that partners do. But it was the casual injustice of it that stung. My deadlines were what funded his dreams. My focus was what kept our shared life stable while he pursued his own business, a boutique sneaker resale company he'd started 3 years ago, a business that ran quite literally on code I had written for free. Then Jerome must have asked the question, the one that prompted the final fatal error. I imagine him saying something like, "You gotta be careful, man. Don't push her too hard." And that's when Wesley laughed. That easy, confident sound. "Dude, please," he said. the words dripping with a certainty that chilled me to my core. She'll never leave. Where's she gonna go? Where's she gonna go? It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of my immobility. It wasn't about love or commitment or desire. It was about logistics. It was the cold calculation of a man who has surveyed his assets and found them to be securely locked down. He wasn't saying, "She loves me too much to leave." He was saying, "I have engineered her circumstances to make leaving impossible." He saw me not as a partner to be cherished, but as a resource to be managed, a foundational piece of his infrastructure. And in that moment, listening to the casual dismissal in his voice, I realized he was right about one thing. The woman he was describing, that permanent, featureless part of his landscape, wouldn't leave. But I was no longer that woman. His words had just debugged me from my own faulty programming, the program of believing my labor was love, when all along it had just been code. The archaeology of this disrespect began, as it so often does, with love. When Wesley first had the idea for his business, Soul Source, I was his biggest cheerleader. He had the passion, the eye for rare sneakers, but he was technologically illiterate. He sketched out his vision on napkins, and I saw a way to help, a way to build something with him. "I need a website, Cam," he'd said, his eyes shining with the pure, uncut optimism of a new venture. "Something clean, high-end, like the ones you build at your job." "Those sites cost tens of thousands of dollars, Wes," I'd told him gently. I know, but you're the smart one. You could figure it out." And I did. I spent 6 weeks of my nights and weekends building it. I designed the user interface, wrote the back-end code for the inventory management, and integrated a payment gateway. I did it as a gift. I poured all my professional expertise into this project, believing I was investing in us. When it launched, it was beautiful, sleek, fast, and professional. He was ecstatic. He bought me flowers and cooked my favorite dinner. "I couldn't have done this without you, baby," he'd said, raising a glass of champagne, "to Camille, for making it all work." I glowed under his praise. I felt seen, valued. I felt like a co-founder, a partner. It is a contaminated memory now. I hear those words differently. He wasn't toasting a partner. He was toasting a highly effective and entirely free piece of software. It was a customer review, not a love letter. The erosion began subtly. The first time the site crashed, it was a Saturday night. We were at my company's annual awards dinner. I was in a black sequin dress, feeling confident and proud of a project I'd successfully led. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was Wesley. Then it buzzed again. And again. I excused myself from the table, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet of the hotel ballroom. "What's wrong?" I whispered, hiding in a small alcove by the coat check. "The site's down. The whole thing," he said, his voice tight with panic. "A new Jordan dropped, and I'm getting emails from customers saying they can't check out. You gotta fix it. Fix the site real quick. Wes, I'm at my event. I don't have my laptop. Can't you do it on your phone? It's an emergency, Cam." The phrase, "fix the site real quick," became a recurring motif in our marriage, a small, 5-word summary of his complete lack of understanding of the complexity of my work. He thought of it like flipping a switch. He had no concept of the diagnostic process, of tracing errors, of the deep focus it required. So there I was, in a bathroom stall at the Four Seasons, balancing my phone on my knee, the sound of muffled speeches and applause bleeding through the marble walls. I remotely accessed the server, found the bug, a memory leak in a plugin he'd tried to install himself without telling me, and pushed a patch. The whole thing took 9 minutes. 9 minutes of frantic, hyper-focused work in a glittering dress that felt like a costume for a life I wasn't actually living. I went back to the table, my heart still racing. My phone buzzed. It was a text from him. "Thanks, babe. You're a lifesaver." That was it. No acknowledgement of where I was, what I had interrupted. No apology. Just a casual sign-off, as if I'd just handed him the remote. My boss was mid-sentence, and I had to force a smile, pretending I had just been touching up my makeup. The sequins on my dress felt heavy, like armor that had failed. That was the first time I felt the shift from partner to utility. My time, my expertise, my presence. They were all resources to be deployed at his convenience. His best friend, Jerome, was the amplifier for this entitlement. Jerome was one of those men who saw marriage as a kind of finish line. Once you crossed it, the race was over. You'd won the prize, and now you just had to make sure it stayed polished on the shelf. We were at a summer cookout in his backyard in Catonsville, a year or so after the business launched. The air was thick with the smell of grilled chicken and the lazy buzz of cicadas. Wesley was holding court by the grill, talking about a particularly successful month for Sole Source. I was on the deck, talking to Jerome's wife, when I overheard Jerome clap Wesley on the back, his voice booming over the Stevie Wonder song playing from the speakers. "You did it, man. Built your own thing from the ground up," Jerome said. Wesley puffed out his chest just a little. "And you got a good woman holding it down at home. Smart, stable job, takes care of you. Man, you got her locked in." Locked in. The phrase hung in the humid air. It was meant as a compliment, a form of masculine approval. "You've secured your assets. Well done." Wesley just grinned, a smug, satisfied expression on his face. He didn't correct him. He didn't say, "She's my partner, not my prisoner." He didn't say, "We built it together." He just accepted the compliment, the ownership it implied. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It was a joke, just guys talking, I told myself. But my internal compiler flagged it as a significant error in the system's logic, an assumption of permanence that had nothing to do with love. The invisible labor wasn't just emergency fixes. It was the constant, low-level maintenance of his digital life. I was the one who handled the invoicing system every quarter, exporting the data and formatting it for his accountant because he couldn't figure out the spreadsheets. I was the one who optimized his product images for faster load times because he'd upload massive files that slowed the whole site to a crawl. I was the one who spent an entire Sunday afternoon setting up his email marketing platform and designing the first template. Each task was a small withdrawal from a joint account of goodwill I thought we shared. But I was the only one making deposits. His requests always started the same way. "Hey babe, when you get a second," or "I know you're busy, but..." It was a performance of consideration that masked a deep-seated expectation. He was acknowledging my time was valuable, but only as a preface to claiming it as his own. One evening, I was on a tight deadline for my own project. A major release was scheduled for the next morning, and I was running final tests. I had been working for 10 hours straight. Wesley walked into my office holding his laptop. "Babe, can you fix the site real quick? The main banner image is looking weird on mobile." "Wes, I can't right now. I'm in the middle of a deployment," I said, not taking my eyes off the screen. "It'll take you like 2 seconds, he wheedled. "You're the smart one. You know how to do the responsive stuff. It won't take 2 seconds. I have to check the CSS breakpoints. I'll look at it tomorrow." His face soured, a flicker of petulant disappointment. "Tomorrow? But I have a big promotion going live tonight. It's gonna look unprofessional." I finally turned to look at him. "Wesley, this is my job. The one that pays for this house, for the servers your site runs on. My focus right now is on not breaking a multi-million-dollar platform for my employer. Your banner can wait." He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "Fine," he muttered, turning to leave. "I'll just figure it out myself." He said it in a tone that was meant to make me feel guilty, as if my refusal was a personal betrayal rather than a professional necessity. He didn't figure it out. The banner was still skewed the next morning. He didn't mention it, but a cool distance settled between us for the next few days, a silent punishment for my failure to perform my unpaid duties on demand. The most insidious part of this erosion was how he used praise as a tool. He would periodically shower me with affection and gratitude, usually after I'd pulled him out of a technological fire. He'd call me his genius, his secret weapon. He'd post a picture of us on Instagram with a caption about how supportive I was. It was a curated performance of appreciation. It wasn't for me. It was for his audience. It was a way of branding himself as the kind of man who valued his wife while privately devaluing her labor. The memory that soured most profoundly was from the celebration of his first year in business. He'd made a modest profit, enough to prove the concept was viable. He took me to a fancy restaurant downtown, one with a view of the harbor. He was giddy, expansive, full of plans for the future. He raised his glass. "To Camille," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the smart one. The one who makes everything possible. I'd be nothing without you." Tears pricked my eyes. In that moment, I felt like the foundation of his world, the bedrock of his success. I felt cherished. Now, I replay that scene and I see it for what it was. He was right. He would have been nothing without me. I wasn't his partner. I was his prerequisite. I wasn't the co-author of his success. I was the free software that allowed him to run his program. His toast was an acknowledgement of his dependency, but he framed it as a tribute to my brilliance. It was a masterful piece of social engineering, and I had willingly compiled. So when I heard him on the phone with Jerome saying, "She'll never leave. Where's she gonna go?" It wasn't just a cruel, dismissive comment. It was the logical conclusion of the system he had built. He had outsourced his entire business infrastructure to me, woven my life so tightly into his operations that he assumed a clean separation was impossible. He thought I was a feature, permanently embedded in his source code. He couldn't imagine I was my own application, running on my own server, and that I had the root password to my own life. He had forgotten that the programmer always has the power to decommission the system. The clarity that descended in that moment was not hot. It wasn't the explosive rage of betrayal. It was cold. It was the quiet, absolute certainty of a mathematical proof. It was the feeling of watching a long, complex program finally execute, processing years of data points, the late-night fixes, the casual dismissals, the praise that felt like payment, and resolving to a single, immutable output. False. The entire premise of our marriage, the one I had been operating on, was false. I didn't storm into the living room. I didn't cry. I didn't throw his words back in his face. My hands, which had been frozen over my keyboard, slowly lowered. I took a deep breath. The hum of my laptop's fan suddenly seemed incredibly loud in the silence. I saved my work, closed the lid, and stood up. The decision had been made somewhere deep in the core of my being, without my conscious participation. My mind was just catching up to what my soul had already concluded. The work wasn't to decide if I was leaving. The work was to plan the deployment. For the next 2 weeks, I was the perfect wife. I was a ghost in my own life, performing the functions of Camille while the real me was elsewhere, running a silent background process. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I listened to his complaints about suppliers and customers. I became the ultimate legacy system, stable on the surface while a massive data migration was happening underneath. My engineering mind took over. An exit, like any complex project, was a matter of logistics and sequencing. I broke it down into smaller tasks, creating a mental project board with tickets and deadlines. Task 1: secure new hardware. I spent my lunch breaks searching for apartments online. I found a 1-bedroom in a secure building in Mount Vernon, a neighborhood I'd always loved, with high ceilings and huge windows. I took a virtual tour, submitted an application with my own sterling credit and salary, and was approved within 24 hours. I signed the lease digitally, using a secure e-signature platform. Task 2: data backup and transfer. I started moving my life out of the house, one small piece at a time. It became a quiet, meticulous game. I packed a gym bag with a week's worth of work clothes and left it in the trunk of my car. I brought a box of my personal documents, my passport, my degree, my birth certificate, to my office and locked it in my desk. I took my favorite books off our shared bookshelf one by one, tucking them into my work tote bag at the end of each day. He never noticed. Why would he? He didn't see the individual components of our life. He only saw the seamless user experience they provided for him. Task 3: decouple the systems. This was the most critical part. I spent a Saturday afternoon, while he was at a sneaker convention, performing a full audit of our digital lives. I opened a new bank account in my name only and set up a payroll redirect for my salary. I methodically went through every online account, changing passwords and removing his access to anything that was mine. The most important step was creating a new admin account for his website. I wrote down the new username and a randomly generated, highly secure password on a piece of paper. Then, I logged into the back end of the site I had built, the digital kingdom he took for granted, and I deleted my own user profile. I revoked my own access. With a final click, my ghost was out of his machine. I was no longer the super user of his life. The irony of those 2 weeks was a constant bitter taste in my mouth. Freed from the emotional labor of trying to make him see me, I was calmer, more efficient. He mistook this for contentment. He saw a placid surface and assumed it meant the waters were deep and still. He had no idea it was the calm of a frozen lake. One night, he came up behind me as I was washing the dishes, my mind running through the final items on my exit checklist. He wrapped his arms around my waist and rested his chin on my shoulder. "I love our quiet nights," he murmured into my hair. "You're my world. You know that?" I felt nothing. It was like listening to a recorded message. The words were correct, but the signal was empty. I had signed the lease on my new apartment that afternoon. His world was standing at the sink, but my world was already a floor plan in a different part of the city. I just leaned my head back against his chest and said, "I know, Wes." My voice was even, my hands steady in the warm, soapy water. It was perhaps the most profound lie I had ever told. The final day was a Friday. He and Jerome were going to a Orioles game. I watched him get dressed, pulling on a jersey, excited as a kid. He kissed me goodbye at the door. "Have a good night, babe. Don't work too late." "I won't," I said. The moment his car pulled away from the curb, I began the final phase of the deployment. There wasn't much left to take. My clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, my plants. I worked with a calm, unhurried efficiency. I didn't rush. I didn't feel frantic or sad. I felt meticulous. I was executing a plan that I had designed with precision. I walked through the rooms one last time. The house felt like a museum of a life I used to live. It was all just furniture and objects, emptied of meaning. The memories were no longer tethered to the space. I had already backed them up and stored them elsewhere. My final action was the simplest. I took a yellow sticky note from the holder on the kitchen counter. I picked up a pen. For a moment, I considered all the things I could write. A long, explanatory letter. A list of grievances. A torrent of accusations. But that would have been an appeal. It would have been an attempt to be understood, to get him to finally acknowledge the truth. I was past that. The goal was not to make him understand. The goal was to inform him that his primary assumption about his world was, and had always been, incorrect. I wrote 3 words. I heard you. I peeled the note off the pad. I walked over to his closed laptop, the sleek silver machine I had helped him pick out, the portal to the business I had built for him. I placed the small yellow square directly in the center of the lid. It was a patch note for his life. A small quiet flag indicating a catastrophic system failure. I picked up my last box, walked out the front door, and did not look back. I locked the door behind me, using the key I would never use again. In my new apartment, the air smelled of fresh paint. The evening sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of light on the bare wooden floors. It was empty. It was quiet. It was all mine. The first text started around 11 that night, just as I was drifting off to sleep in a bed of blankets on the floor. Hey, you up? Where are you? I silenced my phone and turned over. The predictable cascade had begun. The next morning, my phone was a disaster area of notifications. 23 missed calls from Wesley, 15 from Jerome, a wall of texts. Camille, what the hell is going on? Pick up the phone. This isn't funny. Your stuff is gone. Did something happen? Are you okay? Call me right now. The panic was escalating in real time. I made coffee, sat by my new window overlooking the city, and watched his denial curdle into anger. A voicemail came through. I listened to it on speaker, the sound tinny in my empty apartment. All right, Camille, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's childish and manipulative. You can't just disappear. We have a life together. Whatever I did, it can't be this bad. You're being dramatic. Call me back so we can be adults about this. Dramatic, manipulative, childish. The classic vocabulary of a man whose control has been unexpectedly revoked. He wasn't worried about me. He was angry about the sudden, unauthorized change to his user permissions. Later that afternoon, a call came from Jerome. I decided to answer it. Cam, thank God, he said, a wave of relief in his voice. Wes is losing his mind. What's going on? He said he found some weird note. I left, I said calmly. Left? What do you mean left? Like, for the night? Are you at your sister's? No, Jerome, I've left. The marriage is over. A stunned silence on the other end of the line. Whoa, hold on. Over? Just like that? What did he do? Cam, you guys are solid. You can't just throw 8 years away. The foundation was compromised, I said, the engineering metaphor coming to me without thought. It was a controlled demolition. You gotta talk to him, he pleaded. He's a wreck. Whatever it is, you guys can work it out. Thank you for your concern, Jerome, I said, my voice polite but firm. But this is no longer a collaborative project. I ended the call. The negotiation phase began 2 days later. He found my new address. I wasn't surprised. He showed up on a Sunday evening, looking haggard. I met him in the lobby of my building. I would not let him into my new space. It was a clean environment, free of legacy code. Cam, please, he began, his eyes red-rimmed. Just tell me what I did. The note. I heard you. What does that even mean? What did you hear? I heard your conversation with Jerome on Tuesday afternoon. A flash of confusion, then dawning, horrified recognition on his face. He knew, instantly. He started backpedaling, his hands fluttering nervously. That's what this is about? Oh my God, Camille, that was nothing. That was guy talk. It didn't mean anything. It meant everything, Wesley, I said. My voice was quiet even. There was no anger in it, only a profound and unshakable finality. We can fix this, he said, his voice cracking. I'll do anything. We can go to counseling. I'll hire a real web developer, a whole team, I swear. You'll never have to touch the site again. We can take that trip to Mexico you wanted. The offers were pouring out now, a frantic flood of concessions he would have never considered a week ago, when my presence was a given. I looked at him, at this desperate stranger offering me things he thought I wanted, and I felt a wave of pity. He didn't understand that the issue was never the labor itself. It was the assumption behind it. I let him finish. Then I delivered my response, a single quiet correction. The problem, Wesley, isn't that you're offering to fix it now. It's that you didn't see it was broken when you had it for free. That's when he finally broke. The anger and denial evaporated, replaced by a raw, pleading vulnerability. Tears streamed down his face. He wasn't performing now. This was real. This was the terror of a man realizing a fundamental law of his universe had just been repealed. But I was bragging about you, he choked out, the words tumbling over each other. I was bragging. You took it out of context. I was telling Jerome how solid we were, how I had the most amazing, loyal wife in the world, that you'd never leave me. It was a compliment. And there it was. The last line he said, the structural flaw in his entire understanding of me, of us, laid bare. He thought claiming ownership of my loyalty was a form of praise. He thought his certainty of my permanence was a testament to our strength, not evidence of his complacency. He had no idea that loyalty is a choice, renewed daily, and that love is an active verb, not a passive state of being. I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man who had built his world on top of me, and I felt the last vestiges of my own legacy code being deleted. There was nothing left to debug. I redefined his words for him one last time. You weren't bragging about us, Wesley, I said, my voice gentle but clear. You were bragging about your assumptions. And your assumptions were wrong. I turned and walked back to the elevator, leaving him standing in the sterile, brightly lit lobby of a building he could not enter. Rebuilding was not a dramatic act. It was a series of quiet, revolutionary moments. It was the first time I set up my own workspace in my new apartment, a sleek desk by the window, with no one else's urgent, unpaid projects to clutter it. It was buying a coffee machine that made exactly one perfect cup, just for me. It was the profound luxury of a Saturday with no agenda, no one else's emergencies to solve, no one's ego to manage. I started coding for myself. For years, my creative energy had been siphoned off into his venture. Now, it was mine again. I started building a small application I'd been thinking about for months, a tool to help community gardens manage their planting schedules and volunteers. It had no commercial potential. It had no client. It was just for me. The joy of writing clean, elegant code for a problem I cared about was something I hadn't realized I'd lost. I worked late into the night, not because of a deadline, but because I was lost in the flow of creation. There was no one to interrupt me to ask me to fix a banner. The only voice was my own. My life became smaller, but infinitely more my own. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift away because I was always too busy maintaining Wesley's world. I rediscovered the city of Baltimore on my own terms, exploring neighborhoods, museums, and bookstores. I was no longer the silent infrastructure for someone else's life. I was the architect of my own. About 6 months after I left, I saw him. I was in a coffee shop in Federal Hill, working on my garden app. He walked in, and for a second, my breath caught. He looked ordinary. Thinner, maybe, less expansive. He didn't carry himself with the same thoughtless confidence. He was just a man ordering a latte. He was with a woman. He laughed at something she said, and the sound didn't even register as a threat anymore. It was just noise in a crowded cafe. He didn't see me, tucked away in my corner, and I felt an emotion I didn't expect. Nothing. Not anger, not pain, not even a sad nostalgia. Just a quiet, peaceful distance. He was a piece of legacy code from a system I no longer used. I had migrated successfully. He was someone else's problem to debug now. There is a difference between building a home with someone and becoming the foundation of their house. A foundation is essential, but it is also invisible, buried, and taken for granted. It is designed to bear weight, to be silent, to be still. For years, I thought my stillness was a virtue. I called it patience, loyalty, support. I thought that by being the reliable, uncomplaining bedrock, I was expressing the deepest form of love. But love is not about becoming infrastructure. It is not about being the silent, efficient code that runs in the background of someone else's life, asking for nothing, consuming minimal resources. That is not partnership. It is a utility. True partnership is an interface between two complete, independent systems, each running on its own power, each with its own purpose. They choose to connect, to share data, to work in tandem, but they never merge. Each retains its own source code. I didn't leave Wesley because he was a bad man. He was just a man who had forgotten he was married to an architect, not a building. He stood inside the life I had helped design and thought he was the only one who lived there. The ultimate vindication was not his pain or his loss or his diminished presence in a coffee shop. It was the quiet hum of my own server in my own apartment. It was the joy of writing a single line of code for no one but myself. I wrote my own code, and I finally ran. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.